All right, I have 6 o'clock, so we will call our Charter Township of Long Lake Board of Trustees regular meeting to order for July 8th. If we could all rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Balderak.
Here.
Wheelock.
Here.
Robinson.
Here.
Schaub.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
Sievert.
Here.
And Lemkool.
Here. Okay, we'll have our first public comment. Rhonda, if you can read that.
Any person shall be permitted to address the meeting of the Board of Trustees, which is required to be open to the public under the provisions of the Michigan Open Meetings Act, as amended. Public comment shall be carried out in accordance with the following. Any person wishing to address the board shall state their name and address. No person shall be allowed to speak more than once on the same matter, excluding the time needed to answer trustees' questions. The chairperson shall control the amount of time each person shall be allowed to speak, which shall not exceed 3 minutes. The chairperson may extend the amount of time each person is allowed to speak. If a group wishes to address the board, the chairperson may require the group to designate a spokesperson. The Township Board does not respond to comments other than questions by the trustees or to make a necessary clarification. Silence or non-response from the board should not be interpreted as disinterest or disagreement by the board.
All right, first public comment. We have this nice handy-dandy timer now, so
We gotcha.
if we have any.
Are we sure it works?
I know it works.
I'm Tina Allen, 10120 Deer Path South. I've been here before talking to you about short-term rentals, and I've been to the Planning Commission also giving some ideas about that. I live in a Rain Tree Forest subdivision, so if you don't know, I was going to say we're between the stone wall and the Dairy Bar Beach, depends on how long you've lived here, in that neighborhood. And so it's a regular residential place, but we have had 4 short-term rentals in the last 6 years probably. And so this year we have 36 lots, 4 of them are that. We have some that multiple people or people own multiple lots. But we had over 20 of our neighbors put in so that we could sue because our deed restrictions do say no commercial use. And the Michigan Court of Appeals has ruled in the case of deed restrictions that a short-term rental is a commercial use. So, but we had to take that upon ourselves, right? So it's been something where I come in and I would like to say your staff, which includes Ron, Cody, Matt, Ken, I talk to them a lot about short-term rentals. One thing, because I also work with homelessness programs and short-term rentals, 100% are taking homes away from people in our community. I don't like that. I want the people who are making decisions about our taxes being like the fire department and schools and everything else being people who actually are going to live here and care about the community, so that's important. So I wanted to bring you up to date really quickly. I'm going to do 2 things first. I'll bring you up after because I want to get this in. So in the meeting packet, there's a memorandum from Cody that has a thing that says notice to be added to the short-term rental application. And I would like to speak for my neighborhood and say that we are in favor, highly supportive of that kind of language. Just anything, even if you don't change your ordinance at all, which I'd like it to be gone, but that's a whole different thing. I think that this at least puts people on notice that there might be something coming down the way. So I wanted to then say, so I appreciate that. I hope you consider that. So the other thing is just that in our neighborhood, we sued all 4. 2 of them, we shouldn't have even had to sue because they were just people who were renting it for the summer, but it's a whole different thing that lived in the home part of the year. But you can sue everybody or nobody, right? But all of the 3 of the 4 have already had rules against them. They've already had judgments against them. And then the 4th one is in the middle of that are the Judge Elsenheimer, who what used to be our township attorney many years ago. He is actually going to be writing an opinion on it because I think he's getting kind of tired of ruling on these. So I just kind of wanted to bring you up to date, and I am done. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Works well, doesn't it? Thank you.
I'm just going to speak for Jan Messerschmidt. I'm just going to speak for a second to represent Leslie Jones. And she read what you had for the language, but she wanted it to go a step further in that you actually had a check box in there that the person who's applying for the license checks the box that says there's nothing in there, no language in the deed that says that there should not be any short-term vacation rental. So that they acknowledge they've read it, that it's truly there, that they haven't just overlooked it. The second thing she stated was that you guys have a map of all the short-term vacation rentals and where they're at in our community. But she says you're not updating it because we also sued and won, and you haven't removed the Owinga residents, the 3079 Lamppost Lane, and it stopped doing short-term vacation rentals. So you have to remove those so that other people looking to do short-term vacation rentals don't look at our neighborhood and say, oh, Target. As we've had the same problem that she did, we had a second one looking at putting in short-term vacation rentals. So we want to make sure our neighborhood is off the block, don't put any more in there. So that's from Leslie.
All right, thank you. Any other public comment? Hearing none, we'll go on to the consent calendar.
Tonight, the consent calendar consists of the Township Board meeting minutes of June 10th, 25, Treasurer's report of 5/31/25, Planner's report for June 25, zoning permit list for June, zoning report for June, Enforcement Officer's report May 25, Parks Department report May 25, check register May 2025, Assessor's quarterly report, second quarter 2025, and correspondence from Kay Ingraham.
All right, can I get a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved. Second.
All right, we have motion and support. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes. We're going to approve and amend the agenda. The only amendment I have is that Commissioner Morris will not be here tonight. She had no updates for us, so she didn't want to waste our time. So, can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Second.
Can you minus the special report?
Oh, sorry. Mine is the second report from,
Commissioner Morris.
from the county commissioner. Yep.
All right.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes. We have no pending business. We'll go on to new business, which we have our 2024 audit report from Dennis and Garten and Nygarth with Trina and Brittany. Oh, did I miss something?
Conflict of interest.
Oh, conflict of interest. Anybody have any conflict of interest on the,
Nope.
all right. Then we'll move on. What, did I move some? Oh, I moved my.
I think you're out of order here. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you for keeping me on the order. So we'll go on to our special reports. I changed it and canceled them all, right? All right, so we'll go on to Grand Traverse County Commission, Road Commission update. You think I've never done this before?
Good thing it's training.
So we have Larry from the Road Commission.
Hello, how are you? Larry LaCrosse, Superintendent, Road Commission. Just here to do an update. I guess the biggest thing is probably Barney, out for bids right now, so we should be seeing something shortly. Right now, our crew's gonna get out there and do some prep work and do some ditching and do some tree removal and things like that. But the fix should be kind of a mix of fixes really on one leg of road. So we're gonna have chip seal in some spots, wedging and chip seals in some spots, and then we're gonna probably have some crush and shapes in some spots, just to keep the price down and get that fixed. So, coming soon. We're trying to get it done this year, hopefully still, so we're looking to try to get a contractor in and get that road fixed up, so. Other than that, we are coming off from June, and now we're in July, the heat of the summer, so we're, again, doing a lot of ditching, we're doing a lot of tree, well, not so much tree removal, but we're doing a lot of ditching and trying to get that water off the road. We had quite a bit of rain up in the peninsula and Acme and everything, and there's a few roads out here that we fixed. We fixed a little culvert over there off of Long Lake Road there by the campground. So just kind of odds and ends around the counties, or around the township, so nothing too crazy, but we're back at it, and after the 4th, we're going through the townships. We did do long line painting today, you probably saw that, so there's a little bit of that going on in your township today, so that's pretty much what I got.
Cool. Well, thank you for being flexible for the Barney Road and doing different fixes there instead of
Yeah.
trying to push the whole pavement of everything.
Sure. I'm actually really excited about it, because I think if it all works well, then other roads in the entire county could use fixes like that. So we're pretty excited.
Good.
A lot of in-house work, but also contractor work, so.
Larry, since you're here, could you give just a quick update on what's happening at TC West at the Long Lake Road there?
Yep, so we're going to do a intersection upgrade there, or basically a signal update, and we're hoping to bring that down to one single, like a 4 intersection instead of what they have 3 legs right now. So we're really a timing issue though right now, because the contractor that's working with the school is a little ahead of us, and we have to get our things in a row. So there's going to be probably a little bit of a temporary signal setup, but we're hoping to try to be right behind that construction when they're done to actually make that into a traditional intersection. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other comments? The entrance by Timbers looked really good. I think that made it a lot safer down there instead of that washing away down there.
Yeah, that was definitely a good fix. I think that'll work out well for a long time, so we're pretty excited about that.
Cool. All right, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Emergency Services Station update. Chief Down. Nice little fireworks this weekend.
It went well. Obviously, for those that watched, we did have a little hiccup there. Yet again, very, very impressed with the pyrotechnics folks. They do a great job. We had a small hiccup. They hit the button, they stopped, they went out and did their quick inspection and shut down the large shells. So there were still some large shells that they had to take home with them. So that was a good thing. Obviously, it's 4th of July. The holiday weekend was a crazy weekend for us. We were just on the Metro call here a little while ago. Luckily, it was not a real call, but 4 structure fires in the last 7 days. And so busy keeps going. And of course, all the other Met calls, with Cherry Fest end of last week, we were called into the city and Garfield a couple different times because of using up the resources. So it's been an action-packed time. I gave the board the link to the Suppressol. It's a tool that I actually used in my past life. About 20 years ago, I had one of these in my personal vehicle. And what they really do, it's over here on the side, is back 35 years ago, they called it the fire grenade. And so what it really does is it's a quick deployment thing, and it will take the heat out of a fire. It has to be an enclosed room, can't be open, it can't be vented or anything like that. But they have proven many times that this thing will take thousands of degrees out of a room. So obviously what it's designed for is for first response vehicles, chief's vehicles, and we also got one for the ambulance, so that if the fire truck's not there yet or they're getting ready to deploy, that you could actually buy 5 to 7 minutes with the deployment of this device. So actually this year when I went to FDIC, what I used to use, which is almost identical to this, they stopped using because it was a foreign, came from not the U.S., and it's technically explosive because it has a igniter on it. So then, of course, in the days that where what came from, bringing explosives into the country was bad. So this company actually started picking it up, and they're actually made in Chicago now, or just on the outside of Chicagoland. So great thing. Yeah, please watch the video. It's Like I said, it's not designed to put the fire out, but it's actually designed to knock the fire way down, so it gives us that extra time to deploy hand lines and stuff to get inside and fight the fire. So we have one for each one of the Tahoes and for the Alpha. Most of the other stuff, kind of routine stuff, we had some maintenance stuff. Engine 10 went out and had new seals put in it, main seals on the motor already. Luckily that was all under warranty, but we were without the truck for a couple weeks as they did that. Hopefully, knock on wood, hopefully we'll be good for the remainder of its life. And like I said, our extra calls are on a little bit lower than last month, but we are still on for a month of June. It's a high side for us. Even a 58 is a pretty high side for us. So, any questions? Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
thank you, appreciate it. Sean, enforcement update. And I went to see him at the boat launch on Friday, and he left on me.
I did. I know what you guys are thinking. Wow, new uniforms, pretty nice. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, but the 4th of July is a very busy weekend for cops, and I completely botched my schedule in a brain fart. Totally forgot about this meeting until you brought it up this morning, like, hey, you'll be at the meeting, right? Absolutely, I'll be there. So here I am. Unfortunately, I came a little bit unprepared, as you can tell. I don't have all my stats. I told myself, don't forget your computer, and then I totally forgot my computer on my way here. So, but what I can tell you is that it was a very, very, very busy month, and I'm glad the 4th of July weekend went very, very well, but I'm glad it is over. I don't know my calls for service, but what I can say is that the Crescent Shores boat launch is fantastic. The expansion helped a lot, to say the least. There are still some parking issues for single vehicles, but it is drastically improved compared to last year. It was just an absolute nightmare. So things went well down there. Lots of traffic enforcement, lots of calls for service, as the chief said, lots of fires, and all around a pretty good month. So this past couple of weeks, the digital speed sign has been in front of the stone wall at North Long and Deer Path. The data that collected showed, I did a speed study for 3 days of the 2 weeks that it was there. In those 3 days, over 6,000 vehicles passed the sign. The good news is that only 1% of the cars that passed it were dramatically over the speed limit. The vast majority were within the speed limit or 5 miles an hour over, and that was about 99% of the vehicles were in compliance of that. So it's a very small percentage that are dramatically over the speed limit, but they are dramatically over the speed limit for those 1%. So good and bad news there. So that's about it. I apologize that I'm unprepared, but next time I'll have all the stats that you guys could want. So,
And if you haven't noticed, our deputy got new wheels.
I did. I got a brand new Dodge Durango. It is very nice to be out of a teeny little Charger. I got plenty of room, and it is a very nice upgrade, to say the least. So, very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to do a little supervisor update. Rhonda and I spent some time reviewing our hiring and terminating process with our attorneys, and it was determined through that process that once everything's been background checked and everybody's done their stuff, that we'll recommend hiring or terminated, but they don't have to come in front of the board to do all those processes, which would make some of those situations probably a little easier. The only thing, a couple things, that the chief still has authority over the union contract, and those union employees, the rest of you have to come follow our handbooks. So that's why that's all there. So I just want to update everybody on that process and go from there. So, all right. With that, we have a new hire, Jeffrey Lenton. He's a paramedic firefighter. He's part-time, so they'll open up some of that stuff down there at the fire department to help cover some of those open positions. Township open house is July 24th from 4 to 6. It's a Thursday, so we'll have cookies and water for that night. That way, and we've asked the staff to stick around that night so everybody can get to meet them as they come through. And it was also in the newsletter, if everybody got their tax bill over the weekend. And then for budget process, we'll start that in August. And what we're going to do is try and do those at our regular board meetings instead of having another special meeting to do that. It may add an hour or so to our meetings, but we'll try and do it all during that time. All right? Then that's what I have, so now we'll go on to new business. All right, so we have our audit report. Thank you again for coming out tonight.
So hi, I am Brittany Laniga. I was the supervisor on the audit this year. And I am just going to go over, Trina will go over the audit-related communication letter. Do you have the statements? I'll go over those first. So page 5 of the statements, I'm going to go over the management discussion and analysis. This does a really good job of kind of just outlining the major pieces of the financial statements rather than going through all 50 pages.
That one?
Yep, that is perfect. So the very first thing there, it talks about the governmental activities. Property taxes increased by about $191,000, really just due to change in assessed value. Overall, the net position increased for governmental activities about $742,000. But the unrestricted portion decreased by about $2.2 million, which is just due to the capital expenditures this year. Overall, the net position increased by $764,000 between the governmental and business type activities. Moving on to the next page, we can discuss some of the balance sheet items. So if you can just scroll down to show the balance sheet there. So some of the big changes here, you'll see that there's about $2.4 million decrease in current assets. That's again just due to spending down cash for those capital improvements. So there's about a corresponding increase in capital assets. That's about $2.6 million. Overall, the rest of the balance sheet's pretty comparable. For the breakdown of the net position, you'll see that decrease in unrestricted net assets, which there's that corresponding increase in net position invested in capital assets. So moving on to the next page. This is all the activity for the governmental and business type activities. So there's a small increase for charges for services. You'll see the spending of the ARPA funding, so that's that $653,000. And then a decrease in capital grants from last year, that's just that Twin Lake Parks addition. And then there's just some increases in expenses due to some capital expenditures for those special assessments and some small other increases. And that, moving on to the next page, which we kind of went over that. Sorry, go to page 9, so one more page. So this page talks about the different capital assets. So we talked about how the increase in capital assets this year. Of that increase, about $1 million of it was for the Township Hall remodel, $153,000 for that Crescent Shores addition, $87,000 for a Twin Lakes septic pump, and then there's some small other additions like a tractor, baseball fields, and security cameras. So now it's kind of a jump down, but page 43. We'll talk about the budget for the general fund. There it is. So overall, the revenues were slightly over budgeted, so that was by about $575,000, but also expenses were under budget by about $213,000. Overall, the fund balance, if you take the 2024 expenses, fund balance can cover about 4.5 months of that, and that's mainly just due to the 2024 had a lot of capital expenditures that aren't necessarily normal. And that is all I had for that part, unless, was there anything else anyone wanted me to go over?
You told me not to spend more than 700,000, so I
And you
figured
didn't, so yeah,
653
that-
was good, right?
That was good. So Trina will go over the letter now.
So, hello, everybody. I'm Trina Oakes, an audit partner at Dennis Gartland and Yeargarth. And as Brittany said, she went over the financial highlights for the year. We performed an audit. The financial statements are management's responsibility, and then our responsibility is to issue an opinion. And we did issue an unqualified or unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion, and that's the highest level of assurance that we can provide you as auditors. So the first page of the letter talks about internal controls, and we have to categorize those between what's considered a material weakness, which means your normal procedures might not catch a material error of your financial statements, or significant deficiencies, which are items that don't rise to that but are still required to be communicated to the board. So on the second page, we have two items that we've communicated in the past and we're communicating again this year. We did find that there wasn't a complete segregation of duties, so that means that there's not a segregation amongst the accounting, the recording of the accounting, the reconciling of the accounts, and authorizing transactions. And that's inherent in small governmental units because the size of your staff just doesn't allow for that to happen. And then the preparation of the financial statements is another item that, so accounting standards requires that management of the township prepare the entire book here with all of the footnote disclosures. In reality, we do this for the majority of our clients. So we do provide you with drafts and all of the audit adjustments, and those are reviewed and approved by management. So we're still able to issue an opinion on the financial statements, be independent to issue an opinion. So these are just two items that are inherent because of the small size of the township and that we have to report each year. Moving down a little bit, the general fund did have a couple of line items that were expenditure line items that exceeded the budget, but the total expenses were well under the budget for the year. On the bottom of page 2, qualitative aspects of accounting practices. There was a couple of new standards that the township adopted. They didn't really have a significant effect. The first is accounting changes and error corrections. That really just affects the presentation of how the funds are in the financial statements. And then compensated absences was adopted by the township, but it did not have a material effect. So it did result in a very small increase in the accrual, which wasn't recorded because it was too small. On page 3, the financial statements inherently include some estimates, including the depreciation, which is based on the useful lives of the capital assets, the retiree health insurance liability, which is based on an actuarial report that the township gets each year, and the leases receivable, which is based on the lease agreement and an incremental borrowing rate. As far as significant disclosures, we mentioned the lease receivables because that relates to future inflows to the township, and then defined contribution pension plan and other post-employment benefits, which relates to future liabilities of the township. We had no difficulties encountered in performing the audit. On page 4, that's really just a list of audit adjustments. The first section is just some accrual entries that are provided by the township and we post for them. The second section is audit adjustments. The largest of those was related to recognizing that ARPA revenue because it was spent during the year. So we moved it from deferred revenue down to revenue to recognize it. Under uncorrected misstatements there, that was the effect of that new standard. It was $9,500 of additional liability, which we did not record because it was not large enough for the township. We had no disagreements with management and no consultations with other accountants. And then in the middle of page 5, there's some new accounting standards coming up in the future for the township. The first is the single audit or the audit of federal funding. So that limit is going up to $1 million instead of $750,000. That's what triggers that additional audit requirement. So that may come into play for the township with the road grant that was received, which is federal funding. Certain risk disclosures talks about if there is a situation where there is a concentration or a constraint that could negatively affect the township in the future, there could be a disclosure requirement. So I always like to say, if you get a grant and you budget to spend that and then the grant is pulled back, which is happening with some federal funding right now, that might be something that you would have to disclose in your financial statements. It's something that you were relying on that will no longer be available. And then on page 6, financial reporting model improvements affects more disclosures in reporting in the financial statement. The biggest effect is number 5 there, where the budgetary comparison schedules in the financial statements will be required to have some explanations of variances between budget and actual. So a little additional disclosures on those schedules in the future. And we will help with that. That'll be effective in 2026. And then capital assets also expands disclosures for certain kinds of assets, leased assets, public-private partnership assets, and technology arrangements. So additional disclosures there. And then finally, under other matters, there's additional information in the back of the financial statements, the pension and OPEB schedules, the combining financial statements. We did reconcile that to the underlying records and found that it was fairly presented. So any questions on that information?
Okay. Any questions?
No.
None? Can I get a motion to accept these?
I'll make a motion to accept the 2024 audit report from Dennis Gartland and Nagrith.
I'll support.
All right, we have motion and support. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you both for coming out.
Thank you.
We gave them a little nicer place to work this year than
Yeah.
last year. All right, we'll go on to short-term rental. All right, Cody, I'll let you start out. And then if there's any questions, our attorney Todd is here as well, if there's anything that people want to, staff or board want to ask him.
So planning and zoning staff was notified that the board would be reviewing this short-term rental discussion this evening, and we were asked to take a look at the short-term rental ordinance number 178 as amended. Our ordinance enforcement officer is the staff member who is tasked with administering that ordinance. Between them, myself, and our zoning administrator, we put together a brief memo for you and a draft ordinance for your discussion. The changes that staff looked at were kind of threefold, mostly clarifying and housekeeping. The first was what's required on an application, second being issue response, and then third being regulations regarding boat usage. In addition to that, staff is recommending putting a notice on the application regarding how our short-term rental ordinance interacts with deed restrictions or an HOA bylaws. So that's out listed there. And then the attachments for you in the memo are our draft ordinance language. The yellow would show you the changes that we did to the ordinance, and then the picture of the application form so you guys can have a visual of what that looks like.
This was fantastic. This was very, very easy to understand. I think we're all aware of the need for some of these changes. We've made numerous, amendments as we've had different things, unfortunately, usually, unfortunate issues that have come up as a result of this. So I appreciate you putting this on a nice, easy to understand package.
We had comments at planning commission meetings and actually here this evening. How far can we go with having boxes to check to make sure folks have actually understand their own HOA requirements, their own deed restrictions. What can we do as a township? I realize there's limitations, but what can we do to better help so many of our residents who have had to find themselves in legal battles to protect their own interests? And some of it, I'm not sure that we don't help cause confusion by issuing a permit. What can we do, Todd?
The issue for me comes down to what are you wanting and willing to do to enforce anything that you put on the application. For example, if you were to apply a checkbox, and conceptually I've got no problem with putting a checkbox on the application, but the question is if somebody does check that checkbox and then someone in the association or in the development where that short-term rental is going in comes in and says, well, wait a minute, we've got a deed restriction, or our homeowners association prohibits short-term rentals, what are you going to do with that? What are you as a township going to do with that? And one of the things that you might decide to do is, well, we're going to revoke the permit because you have in your, probably not revoke, it would be suspend, would probably be the action that you would take. But one of the conditions that you have under Section 7 of your short-term rental ordinance for violations is that they provided false or misleading information on the application for a short-term rental certificate. Well, that opens up the Pandora's box of the township board then being the arbiter of, one, whether or not there is a deed restriction that is valid and enforceable, or a homeowners association rule that is valid or enforceable, which is one of the reasons why I've always counseled, frankly, the township not to get into that role and start taking on the responsibility of enforcing private agreements between individuals, because that's not your fight, quite frankly. And I understand the desire to try and avoid confusion and to make it clear to the public that just because we're giving you a short-term rental permit doesn't mean you have the right to evade or ignore other private restrictions that might be in place. I think this notice goes quite a ways in getting you there. I'm not sure I see a checkbox as providing much protection for anyone unless you're willing to enforce it if it's been violated. The reality of the situation is if they get the short-term rental ordinance in violation of the deed restrictions or the association rules and regulations, that association or the residents in that subdivision that have that deed restriction are going to have to file suit on their own right in order to enforce that, and then the judge is going to make the decision. So, and that's the way it should happen, in my opinion, from a legal standpoint. Because I think there is some risk in a municipality stepping in and trying to enforce private agreements and private contracts between parties that are not the municipality. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, it sure makes it a challenging situation to help the residents, but also not put ourselves in a position where we're finding ourselves involved in every one of those lawsuits, which is not necessarily what the entire rest of the community would want.
Well, you have provisions in here that say that the property must comply with your zoning ordinance and your other rules and regulations. So you're willing to step up and enforce your laws and take on that responsibility. It's just difficult for a municipality to go the step further and enforce private rights that the municipality is not a part of.
But we could certainly call it out in clear terms in the application on that we can put it in bold, we can,
50-point font,
right,
one
try
letter
to
per
make it
page,
as
sure.
clear as possible. I mean, can you go a step and say that they would agree to relinquish their, I mean, we're saying we would revoke or we would suspend. Can we also say that they, by signing this, agree to relinquish? Does that help us in any way? Does that help anything, or
Who's going to be the
semantics?
arbiter of whether or not they're actually violating
Right,
a deed restriction or an association rule?
right.
Are you
It's the
going to take
courts.
on that role, or if the residents of the community go so far as to file a lawsuit against them, the judge is going to shut them down if they're violating
Right.
the rule or regulation? So
I think something else too about these deed restrictions is that they can change, so we might issue the permit. Homeowners Association could change their deed restriction. Where do we fit into that? So I,
And the Planning Commission doesn't have a copy of everyone's deed restrictions. And like you said, the few we have, that I think a past planner did keep some in the file, but now they're useless to us because we don't know if they're current.
right.
And the hard part is that if you start here, where do we continue going down that path of enforcing everybody's, because you got your federal government, state government, county government, township government, local, and then you get into the deed restrictions, and you can't enforce other people's, and I think that's the hard part when you get into that.
But I think it's appropriate and good practice to provide something like the notice that is on the application that makes it clear to the people. If you wanted to add something else, maybe under the sign line, I don't remember if it even says this, but something about, I attest to the fact that I have read this complete application and understand it and have no questions, or anything like that, which would mean then that obviously they read the notice.
At least stated they did, sure.
Sure.
And puts a little more responsibility on them to pause, unless they're truly a bad actor, but, that might cause somebody to slow down and look and make sure.
And it would also be ammunition for the residents coming to them. You signed it saying that you knew and obviously didn't.
So you're dishonest.
Another question, and maybe this came up when you attended one of our planning commission meetings. Is there anything else we should be doing with our licensing program? It's a one-year, non-grandfathered in opportunity, not a grandfather right. Should we have any other language to that on the application, on their permit, and anything else we could do to further, again, call it out in bigger letters? So should there be a time, need, or reason for a change on the township-wide basis or a district basis, that it's very clear that anybody coming in making an investment to do a short-term rental or otherwise realizes they've only got a permit as long as that one-year license is active.
I haven't read the ordinance with that in mind, but I think it says something to the effect that, the issuance of a license in any given year is not a guarantee that you're going to get it in the future, something along those lines. The permit that they receive is for a calendar year. It's not a multi-year. There's an actual date on it so that they know what year that permit is for. Sure, we could probably dream up some other stuff that might make it more clear than it already is, but I think you've beat that horse to death, no pun intended. And so I don't know that I think you need anything more than that.
Okay. Just on each of these issues, the more clear we can be, I think the better. I would anticipate issues coming up at some point in time on each of these areas, as we've already had the court cases, and at some point somebody doesn't receive their license for the following year, revoked or otherwise.
Well, the
Just to make sure
reality
we're
of this is
protected.
it's big business for the people that have these homes that can rent them for thousands of dollars a week, and so they're going to push the envelope, that's for sure. We've seen that here. We've seen that in other communities that have had short-term rental issues. So you're right to be thinking about this.
A couple other questions, I guess, for maybe discussion with the board, but also while you're up there, Todd. I've done some research and looking across the state, across the country. Short-term rentals are opportunities, but also create issues within communities. A couple things that we don't have currently in our ordinance is any kind of a cap, and many communities do, whether it's cap in total or cap by district. Some also have some limitations based upon, find my notes here, of proximity. I'm noticing in some areas of the township where we're starting to get a few of these things to cluster together that can have the impact of changing potentially the characteristics of the neighborhood, and all of a sudden you unintentionally end up with 5 in a row or 3 on this side of the street and 3 on that side of the street. You've got a significantly different situation, I think. What can we do, or what are you seeing, any suggestions relative to caps, relative to proximity limits?
So, East Bay Township, I think, is a good example of a township that has both a cap and a proximity limitation. I don't know off the top of my head how many short-term rental licenses they have. Yeah, 100 and 1,000 feet apart. If memory serves, though, once you get a license, you keep it. Yeah, you have priority from 1 year to the next. So you wind up with a waiting list for people who might want a short-term rental permit. It seems to work for them, and whether or not, this township wants to undertake that type of limitation, something that we should discuss if that's something you want to pursue. It is a police power ordinance, and so they're valid, they're enforceable. I don't know that anyone's directly challenged the East Bay Township cap on the number of permits, but it seems to be holding and something that the municipality can do. The distance, so that you don't get them all clustered along the lake shore or in any particular place. Again, so long as you can relate it to protecting the health, safety, welfare of the residents of the township, and you can articulate that, then it is something within your wheelhouse to regulate. So if that's something you want to look at, be more than happy to do that.
And I guess on that topic, just for my fellow trustees, as I've looked at certain markets, and a few of us sat in a session down at the MTA where are some communities in the state that are becoming quite challenged with overrun of STRs. I think what we have in place is a very good program, and it will help us to a great deal in terms of being necessarily overrun. But there are examples across the state and across the country where there are too many happening that does, actually a comment we had earlier tonight, that will affect housing stock. Obviously, it affects what happens to when some of that stock moves from maybe long-term rental to short-term rental. We do know we have a housing problem in this community. That I think it has a bearing there to not allow the number to become too great. I think we also have situations with Traverse City and Sutton's Bay, communities very close to us in our same tourist area, I would call it, who have put limitations themselves on those areas. I think as the demand continues to grow and communities around us are putting in restrictions, we're going to be a place that some of that demand may come to. I think I don't know if we're under great pressure right now for a lot of additional growth, but I'm not sure what would happen, and I'm not saying we necessarily even reduce the number from where we stand, but do we make sure we protect ourselves from any unforeseen consequences? It doesn't mean you can't change caps later or make adjustments, but protect ourselves for where we are currently, and recognizing what's happening around the state and recognizing what's happening in communities around us who are putting limits, just to prevent an influx coming to us, and all of a sudden our heads are spinning
Right.
in a year or two and say, ooh, this got ahead of us.
Okay. Cody, do you know how many we started with when we first started our ordinance?
I don't know that number, no.
So we'll
But
have
I
to
do
look-
know that the last few years, we've hovered right around 100, 120 short-term rental ordinances. It stayed steady. Currently, we have 116, and I imagine that's good to actually drop a couple because of some of the suits that have been filed, so some of those are going to cease to continue operation. So we're actually projecting for 2 or 3 less because we have a couple in the docket. So we're still going to hover right around that same number we did last year and the year before. So our market seems to be stagnant as far as expansion goes.
Because I think that's kind of where we started in the beginning, was around then. I think we've always been kind of status once we put that ordinance in place, and that way we knew where everybody's was.
Yeah, forgive me, I don't remember the exact number, but that's also the impression I got when I was researching it, is we have stayed stagnant since the start, so.
And I don't have, obviously, I can't see what's going to happen in the future, and it could blow up on us, but it appears that it's kind of reached the max of demand. Talking to a few different people, their rentals are way down. And I can say my husband does take care of a rental for a friend of ours, and it used to be booked the entire summer. He only has 2 weeks booked this year. So I'm wondering, if the demand has been met. Who knows what can happen year to year? You have no idea.
Sure.
I agree. If you're just looking for some input, I agree with everything you said, Kevin, and anecdotally hearing the same thing, that some of the folks that have done it are realizing that bookings are way down, so now they're having to kind of pivot and figure out what they're going to do with it. If we're going to make a change, though, I would say that, now's the time to try and maybe set that, because, we've made some other changes that have affected folks who came into it planning to fully comply with our ordinance, and then we changed the rules, and it made it to where they couldn't, and that just didn't feel very fair to me. So if the community does feel that we need to start adding additional thresholds, such as a number or a proximity, we should try. I'm of the opinion that we should try and set it up so that it doesn't affect folks that maybe have come into this with eyes wide open and are trying to be good neighbors and provide a service that our community, clearly feels they need. I have a short-term rental on one side of me. I've not ever had a single problem, but I'm very lucky in that I have a responsible neighbor who's, taking care of it. So.
Yeah, I guess as I raise the questions, I'm not thinking that we try to come up with a number and go below 116 or 114 or 12 or whatever the number is going to be. My thought would be maybe we just protect ourselves and have a number that's something comfortably above that resonates with what percentage of homes. I don't even know what that number comes in relative to total. And proximity, same thing. I guess I'm thinking, to me, there's a concern for proximity in the area where I live particularly. It's not an overload, but I'm seeing a few things happen, and I could see where all of a sudden you could have a series of homes that become one after the next rentals. And I don't know if that's really appropriate in terms of the impact that has on the neighborhood. And all of a sudden you have a real pocket of transient guests. That certainly changes the feel of the neighborhood. And again, my thought would be we could look at that now and see where we've got consolidation happening of these types of homes, and can we maybe have some kind of a proximity limitation that maybe affects nobody currently but prevents a proximity situation from happening down the road. So basically, we take both of those numbers, strike them in above where we are, we seem comfortable, but come up with something that makes sense, that just gives us that protection. No harm, no foul to anything, but just allows us to have some protection from things getting out of control before we suddenly have people who've made investments or have made decisions to do certain things and comply, and then we come back and try to change a rule.
Right. I've got one next to me, and we've watched kids grow up. So they may be transient, but they're the same people that show up every year that rent the same weeks over and over. And so we've got kids that started out young, and now 10 years later, they're the same kids. And I think a lot of it's trying to, when we started this process was looking at how do we protect the people that that maybe they have their grandparents' cottage or their parents' cottage, and how do we keep them in that same environment and keep it going? I think that was one of the things to look at. The cause that you get now is that some people come in and buy it as an investment property as well. And how do we protect that same dynamic of what it looks like, and, I think some of the things we put in place were the bedrooms and, keeping it down to 2 people per bedroom based on the septic. And then you only get 1.5 times, which stopped a lot of the partying that was going on in a lot of the homes. So I think that was some of the rules. But, it's kind of looking at it saying, I can agree with you where it's saying, okay, when's the time to start saying, this is what we want, this is the max. So I think that, with staff, they can go in and look at some of that, what it would take to, what other people are doing, the time it takes to do that. I think a lot of it is that we have to look at these fees that we put in place can only cover what the time that the staff spends. So if all of a sudden we have to start adding more staff to regulate these and look into that, we have to look at some of that dependent, because it's really, if I talked to the chief today and I talked to Sean and I said, how many homes have you been to that were caused that we've had, excess time to go there because they're short-term rentals? And the chief said that, so over the weekend we had someone plugged a battery instead of a Tesla, plugged a Ford Lightning into it and caused it to melt on the wall. So that's the only call that they've really been to those, and we are not getting a lot of calls for complaints, other than sometimes we get them where they're too late. There's nothing we can do. Some of them should actually call the police for noise, because that's the process that they're supposed to go through. And some just, I don't want to call the system. And there's a lot of things we can do to help police these things. We have taken a license away from somebody because they were not following the rules, and I think that's trying to make sure that that's how we keep them being neighborly. And I think that's trying to make sure that we put those in place to make sure people do what they're supposed to do.
Sure.
I think you raised some really good points, Ron, and calling on my own circumstance. So the property next to me was on a very large piece of property that was completely undeveloped. North Long Lake Road was literally a 2-track that saw, according to my now deceased former neighbor, like 8, maybe 10 cars a day during this time of the year when his family first came here. So he passed away unexpectedly. His son, trying to desperately hold on to this property, but isn't in a place where he can drop everything, move cross-country, move into it. He's trying to hold on to it long enough to where he can then retire, move into the property and retain it. If it weren't for us allowing these in some capacity, he would have had no choice but to literally sell the family farm, which would have been a tragedy. So, I think it's unfortunate we only hear about the bad experiences, but there's a lot of really good ones happening out there. And the short-term ordinance was adopted during the 4-year term when I wasn't on the board. And I was kind of looking at it from both perspectives. What if I've had some health issues? What if something happened and I couldn't work, and I needed to provide some income for my family? Could I get a short-term license, move into a state park for 3 months out of the year to allow me and my family to stay? So I think it's a great thing. We're going to have more modifications to this as we move forward. And I think it's good to be looking maybe at what is that next tweak that we need to make. But from everything I'm hearing and other folks throughout Northwest Michigan and beyond, we really have been a model for a lot of communities. A lot of communities, I just talked to one of the other township supervisors in Leland County, they've been talking about it since we adopted ours. They have gotten no closer. So we've learned a lot of lessons, and I think we really kind of honed our tool here. It's getting better, but it is unfortunate that there's just some bad people out there that are just going to take advantage of whatever you try and do to make it good for everybody.
So what I'm hearing is that we'll ask staff to look at some numbers, the time it takes to see what some of those caps are, the footage is how many people are doing those, and we'll take a look at that, some of that, and bring some of that back. If we make changes, Cody, what's the process to our ordinance? Or I could ask Todd that. There's some timelines.
Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe with police power ordinances, you do not have to hold a public hearing. The board doesn't have to hold one. You would bring draft language and pass a resolution amending your ordinance to whatever changes you guys desire to do so. So it's a little bit more streamlined than zoning ordinance change.
And it can go into effect after publication.
I think it's 7 days after publication. Yeah. So we have to put it in the paper.
The goal would be, if we make any changes, to do it before our next season, which they're open for October 1st.
October 1st, they will be able to start applying for 2026.
And Cody, if Ken can, maybe give us some idea of how close the closest short-term rentals are to each other?
We can definitely do that. We do have a short-term rental map that we have that we
Okay.
can pull distances from, and it kind of shows the distribution as well.
Because I would kind of hate to have somebody who's been in it since the beginning, and then all of a sudden say, well, you're too close.
Yeah, anecdotally, I was looking briefly while you guys were commenting on it, that we do have a couple neighbors, so we might run into that issue depending on what distance is decided, if a distance is decided.
But just if we had a number, roughly how many that was, or how far away, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Well, on that same topic, because I've done a good bit of research here this morning on that, and trying to me, if we can do these things and protect the community, but not stir everything up and pull the rug out from anybody, I'm not interested in doing that if we can help it. One idea on the proximity that I had read, and I can get back with you, Cody, but just for the rest of the group, instead of saying, there are some that say you can't have them within 100 feet of each other or 300 feet, so then you start knocking down how close they can be from that perspective. But another one was as broad as, say, within 5,000 feet, you could only have 3, but that means you could have neighbors that could be, wouldn't, eliminate a situation like Dan. Just because you have one right beside you, maybe you could have another, but if you're within 5,000 feet and you're limited to 2 or 3, all of a sudden, at least you're going to keep it less than 50% of the homes within that range by and large. 500 feet, am I saying? I'm not sure what number I just said, but take a 500-foot stretch of road and only allow 2 to 3 STRs within that range, even if they're right beside each other, but you would become a little more limiting. So I'm just trying to be creative of how you could not have 6 homes all across from each other and a big section suddenly become a pocket, but you could still allow some things to happen where you're not restricting side by side if we already have those, but you're not going to have side by side with 4 more happening if we've already got 2 licenses within 500 feet.
So what I'm understanding is you're saying a density mechanism instead of a distance mechanism as far as limiting that?
I guess in essence, yeah, I guess that's what it would end up being. So not just strictly one number that says no 2 licenses within 300 feet, no 2 licenses within a broader range. That way they could actually get a couple, 2 or 3 next door to each other. I guess in my mind I'm thinking less than 2 or less than 3, but that would be for everybody to have discussion. But a way that would still accommodate where we already have neighbors that are doing it, or I have a neighbor who has one, but at some point I suddenly need to do as Dan described. How can you do it so it can be accommodating, but we just don't have a large number picked up? And one other comment in terms of, saving the family cottage, and that's been a key piece, and I think is a wonderful part of what we have, and that the program should exist. But I do know of at least one situation where the IRS views this as commercial activity, and in business, if you have a commercial piece of property, you can sell it, not have to pay capital gains if you re-employ it in another commercial activity. It's called a 1031 exchange. So the IRS accepts it, the state accepts it, but those kinds of things happen, and that can put pressure on us where it's not trying to save the cottage. It's somebody who sold a business and suddenly wants to put that money to use and avoid capital gains. What a great way to do it, to not truly be into a full operating business, but now all of a sudden you've avoided capital gains, which is a significant savings, and that'll drive the price of the home up real quick, because those things have to be done quickly after purchase. And that takes that house out of stock for a family, and it takes that house out of stock for rental, for long-term rental. So those are things to be concerned about that our community, I think, will face over time. We're a great tourist destination.
Okay. Great. Anything else? So staff, you have your...
The only other consideration I would urge from a staff perspective is the staff will do our best to administer whatever ordinance the 7 of you decide on and changes you do. Just consider that the more complex the ordinance, the more complex the enforcement. So at some point it either becomes too big of a burden for current staff, or it becomes a reallocation of time. So just keep that in mind as you're going through some of these proposed changes.
Okay. All right. Anything else? All right. We'll bring back some more information later. Thank you. All right. We'll go on to resolution for Parks Department. So with our fee boxes at Crescent Shores and Gilbert Park, we need to get some help picking that up. So this resolution allows Jim and Eric to collect the fees and then bring them to the treasurer. So, because I know over the weekend it was a little full, wasn't it?
Ron, how are, obviously with us naming specific individuals, how is this going to be?
So the goal would be that they would collect them when both of them are working on Tuesdays?
Well, I just mean 10 years from now, Jim's probably going to be retired.
Yeah, we'd have to redo it again.
So how does that get monitored to make sure that, assuming that somebody determined this resolution was necessary to keep our nose clean, so.
Yep. Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, wondering what Dan's getting at, maybe should we have
The person's
the
title.
parks manager and his assistant?
Or-
Then you don't have to redo it later?
Or individuals as appointed by, say, the supervisor and clerk, or two of the elected, something other than just named individuals.
Okay.
If that's not going to get us in a jam, I just don't know. Procedurally, let's say, this gets forgotten, and 20 years from now, somebody alleges some wrongdoing, and they pull out this document, like, well, Jim Sonby retired 10 years ago, for crying out loud. I just don't.
It could be something that we forget to update, yes.
Absolutely.
If you're going to do that, and I have no problem with that, I'd recommend you go the route of naming the position that person holds, as opposed to saying, somebody appointed by the treasurer and the clerk. Because let's say that person leaves, we got the same problem that we've got with actually putting their names in. Somebody's got to remember that they're the ones that the treasurer and the clerk appointed, and that the resolution needs to be amended. Whereas if you just put in the title that person holds, then as that transitions, you don't have to come back and revisit your resolution. So I think that does make some sense.
Okay.
And on that note, I would say then maybe also put that in those, if it's two positions, put that in the job description. At least when I was in business, it gives you one more reason to pull up that job description and make sure we've told that person, or we're bringing somebody on that maybe for whatever reason we don't want them to have that authority or responsibility. You're going to see it in the job description and catch it and know to
That's
come
a
back
good
and
idea.
change.
Yep. Yeah, so I'd recommend changing the names to the park supervisor and the parks assistant.
With that modification, I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 7-25-13, authorizing certain township employees to collect and transfer the treasurer boat launch fees from Crescent Shores and Gilbert Park boat launches.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Balderack?
Yes.
Sievert?
Yes.
Schab?
Yes.
Wheelock?
Yes.
Robinson?
Yes?
Wagner?
Yes.
Lemkool?
Yes. Motion passes. All right, we'll go on to the Anavan phone upgrade and consolidation. So what this does is it's looking at, thanks Todd for your time. So this looks at upgrading the phone systems because we've had some problems with our current ones that's been getting worse. And so we looked at upgrading everything between the township offices and the emergency services station. And this will actually give us a savings of about $550 a month to do this. And then everything would be on the same system. And we just got done doing the doors down there, so now it's, the fobs all work different areas and still with keeping the same security. So this is just the next phase for that. So this cost would be $13,474 to have this done.
And for the people that aren't here day to day, the trustees that aren't here, the phones are getting, Sarah leaves her desk and I'm trying to pick up the call, and sometimes you just can't even get it. And, just things that are making it hard to service people. Yep.
So, and I understand it will save us $550 a month in fees with this? Is that what you just stated, Ron? So break even on the 13,000 is about 2 years?
Yep. and upgrade it. Eventually, it actually hooks to your computers and everything, so.
I'll make the motion, we approve the upgrades for the amount, let's see, $13,474.40 as presented.
I'll second that.
All right, I heard Kendra first.
That's fine.
We have motion and support. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes. Next, we're going to go down to the, let's see if I find it again. So we have this cabin that sits down at the Twin Lakes, and I had a quote to tear it down for just under $5,000, and it's full of mold. And so then I had a quote to renovate it for about $15,000. And I'm not sure it's worth it, but I just want to put it in front of everybody to say, do you want to save it? Do you want to get rid of it? It really, I mean, it would be a rental down there, but I think it'd take a long time to pay for it. And if you look at the cabin, the really nice Olson's cabin next to it, it really doesn't match that area down there. So.
I do remember when we walked the property that it very much appeared like it had served its useful life.
Right. So instead of just approving, I just wanted to put it in front of you, and if someone said, no, we got to save it, then we would, but other than that, I think we'll just approve to tear it, and it's within my range, and I'll just take care of it. Okay?
Perfect.
All right. Then next on it is Planning Commission appointment. Kevin is stepping down for time, and then Dan Wagner I'm recommending him be the board rep, and he said he would. So if I can get a motion to approve that.
I'll make a motion to approve Dan Wagner as the appointment to the Planning Commission.
All right, we have motion and support. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes. We'll go on to our second public comment. Same rules apply, same clock.
Don't turn it on yet.
Sorry. Can I turn it down? No, stop, just before.
Jan Messerschmidt, and I guess just with regards to the short-term vacation rental, I would like to encourage you to put a cap a little bit below, if you're going to cap it, below where you see it at, so that the units you do have stay strong. So they're not left drifting out there saying, take anybody we can get. Don't have one-night rentals, because then you wind up with the one-night stay. Put them in there, say it's going to be a week. Make these units strong, what you do choose to have. I mentioned if you're going to do it and you're going to have a proximity, I mentioned having something similar to what you would see for the sex offenders. It has to be a certain distance from schools. It has to be a certain distance from churches. It has to be a certain distance from bus stops so that you don't put our children at risk. The people you don't see up here are the children, and I wish they could get up here and speak for themselves, or the young parents that are working. When we had this come into our neighborhood, we had something called the stroller brigade. We had several young parents get together with their strollers and their kids, and some had twosies and threesies, and they would go around the little circuit, and it was a time for them to get together. The second this came in the neighborhood, those stopped. When I asked the young parents, why did this stop? They said, we're not walking by that place because we don't know who's in there. As I mentioned before, I had a pedophile come through my clinic. He talked about how easy it was to go through our short-term vacation rental units. He was not well controlled, guys. He's not somebody I would want next to my children. I don't have any, thank God for that, but he's not somebody I would want next to them. You have to pay attention to who's on that sex offender list. I would love to see the Sheriff's Department present a course, and anybody that's going to be licensed takes a course from the Sheriff's Department that deals with drug trafficking, sex trafficking, human trafficking, so that they can be aware when they see it who's going through there. We did have a car come through that stayed for almost 2 months. It would miss a day or two here and there, but it had another car associated with it every night. And it's like, okay, what's going on here? We had questions. Can you really say what it was? No, we can't, but we had a lot of questions about that. I think that that's something that the awareness needs to jack way up there. There's too much pressure on young parents, young families, and young kids coming through in today's society I want to see our kids in our neighborhood grow up to feel free to, yeah, I feel like jumping on my bike and riding around that circle, and my parents aren't going to have to watch me every second. And I think that that's really important, to have an environment that is conducive to kids growing up being healthy, getting them outdoors to play outdoors, because it's massive for mental development and physical development. So thank you, and thank you for considering everything.
Thank you.
Just because I can't shut up. I'm Tina Allen, just so you know, Heidi. So I was going to start this by going, I know where you all live, and then I thought, well, that sounds really creepy, except Dwayne and Kendra, I don't know where you live, but I do just happen to know where but there's a reason for me saying this. In the ordinance, it says the first purpose is to protect the integrity of residential neighborhoods, right? Okay. So I appreciate the stories you guys told about situations, but most of those are on the lake, when people are wanting to protect a cottage, most of them, or an agricultural right? But Linda and I, because I happen to know we just live in subdivisions, people don't go, I'm going to give my bi-level to my grandchildren forever, right? It's a little bit different. So we actually do have the ability to limit where that we allow this. It would be through the Planning Commission. And they talked about it at one point, but didn't get much traction. But it could be allowed in just lake residential and ag, but maybe not low density, where they happen to just be people move there because it's a neighborhood and they want to know each other. And her story actually happened kind of in our neighborhood too. And then I just wanted to say that, like, when you think about my neighborhood, it was 10% of the lots. 10% of the lots within 3 years became short-term rentals. And then 22 of the 32 lots are actually putting their money into stopping them. I know that's not where we want to be. And so I do get it, because I've been in your shoes, how difficult it is to make those decisions, right, based on that. But I just wanted to kind of give that different perspective. And then the only other thing I wanted to tell you, just for interest, is we are now having to call every time a house lists, and we have had houses list, 3 actually, well, one of them's our short-term rental that's got to go now because they just got ruled against. But we call the realtor, and we just say, just so you know, tell anybody who's looking at this house that we will sue them if they try to short-term rental. But we feel grumpy and mean, like, welcome to the neighborhood. But if you don't do what we like, we're going to sue you. So that's all. That was all I was going to say. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other public comment? Hearing none, we'll go on to any budget amendments?
No, we did get application number 14 today, so we haven't paid it yet. But it says on their final, so we might be just about done.
Yeah, about 5% left.
Yeah, we might be done paying for the building.
Right.
Next month, we'll have it.
Okay. Any Board of Trustee comments?
Yes, I would. My wife and I, we had an event down at the Gilbert Park, and in the outdoor area there, it was fantastic. Everything was clean. Kids had a great time on the play equipment, and the restrooms outdoors everything was spotless. And they just wanted to pass that along to the board, that you all have done a good job at upkeeping it. And she also made the comment of years ago when we used to go there, it wasn't in that great a shape. And so people are noticing the improvements that for all the time that Ron and the rest of the people here who keep this place up, you're doing a great job. And she wanted me to pass that along.
We'll share that with all the parks guys, because they take a lot of work down there, and Kim, and keeping everything done. So, all right, thank you. Any other board comment?
I'll just give a quick update from my last meeting as a planning commissioner, at least for this round. Just in terms of the liaison report, the 3 primary things that the planning commission is working on right now, still working on ADUs. It's going back, kind of being re-looked at in a little more detail, but work in progress. Activity centers, Everybody's aware of where we stood with that, voted down, but it is coming back to be looked at, maybe in a little bit different approach, but that'll be started back up on their plate as they move forward. And then there is work being done on a tree ordinance, and right now that's sitting in an ad hoc committee that is starting tomorrow, I believe. So whether public or anyone else who has interest in participating in that, that's an open session that would be available for folks to participate. And then finally, I'm going to say thank you very much, Dan, for taking on the work and responsibility of stepping into the Planning Commission as a member from our board to the Planning Commission.
You're welcome, and thank you for your time in that seat. I know it's tough position, so.
You're the right guy for the job. Thank you for taking it on.
All right, any other comments? All right, then we will adjourn at 7:20.
So what, is it like full of some chemical or something? I mean, once dry.